Hello, Biz Catalyst 360 and Northern Lights Publishing welcome you to RoundTable 360 with your host and moderator, Joseph Carabas. RoundTable 360 brings together people in the creative fields, dancers, thespians, poets, actors, musicians, authors, and others from across the globe in conversation about things that are relevant, irrelevant, serious, and fun. Today's episode is Who Goes There? If a camel is a horse designed by committee, is an elephant a tuba designed by AI? Today's guests include Senior Hayes Soloway IP attorney and expert on AI and U.S. law, Todd Sullivan. EU-based actor, voice artist, and model, Sabine Rosbach. AI marketer and strategist, Kristen Richter. Creativity guide, expressive and experimental artist, Sarah Bowden. Multimedia artist and AI explorer, John Scullin. And a host of others. Stay with us and enjoy. Who would like to go first? Raise your hands. Liz, what you raised your hand first.
Yeah, just to say, I do use AI because I use Pro Writing Aid, which uses AI quite heavily, but I don't use every aspect of it because one of the elements you can use is basically you can check your style to see how closely it corresponds to the style of a famous author. And when I first started using Pro Writing Aid, I didn't realize that I realized afterwards they obviously must have trawled through all those authors' works for them to be able to offer that facility, and all of those authors would not have received a penny for the use of their works. And that, I think, is one of the big, what I've heard is one of the big bugbears with authors is that AI companies and software are using their works and they don't get any compensation for this.
That sounds like a copyright issue. I could be mistaken, though.
Sure.
Raise your hand. Use the raise your hand feature, folks, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so I'll know who wants to chat. John, I believe you had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, I had a question to writers about AI and kind of like the use that Liz brought up of checking your work. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but like when you do something like that, you're quickly comparing it to make sure you're not directly infringing on anything. But as a writer, you're inspired by things that you've read about in the past or experienced in real life and draw from that. Is that not similar? It's just making it much more accessible to more people. You're not like directly like copying the work of something. You're just being inspired by it, which is what AI is kind of doing, if you allow it to.
Do you ask, do we use it before or after we're writing something?
Both. The way I understood it was that she was checking her work to make sure it was her own, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, just to interrupt. No, what Pro Writing Aid offers is the chance for you to compare your work to the style of other writers, so you can write in the style of those authors. So it's not checking for plagiarism or anything like that. It's just showing you how close your style is. It literally, you can click on an author like, I don't know, say Charles Dickens or someone else. You could, that's obviously quite an old one. I can't think of a modern one that they offer. You can literally check on it, click on it, and it will tell you how close you are to the style of another author. If you want to write in the style of that author, and obviously for some genres you'd like to write in the style of obviously popular and famous authors, but I actually feel it's a little, it makes me a bit uncomfortable, so I don't actually use that facility because I think it's a little unethical, so I don't actually use that one. But that's where it offers you the chance for you to actually in a way copy the style of other authors, so you can actually make your style more like theirs without you actually doing the work really.
Interesting. The way that I use it, I use Midjourney to be exact, is very much like a stock photography site or the clip art books from way back when, or you would have a graphic artist would actually like have a catalog of things that they've collected to scan and reproduce in a way. And it lets me iterate on things or create those assets more precisely to what's being asked about or requested. There are ways you can say, you can abuse it, obviously, where you say, like, make me this poster or book cover where it's done like the movie posters for Star Wars or something like that. And it will find the artist and you'll have that like texture and the look of it, but it's not like directly lifting it. And that's one way to abuse it. But as an example, like the RoundTable logo background behind Joseph is what I did. And the request was to have all these Greek icons and figures and stuff like that. And to get that cohesive look, it would have taken a couple of weeks to figure it out, like to get it all together, give them some options, things like that. Whereas with AI, I was able to say, like, give me this exact face. I want to do it in the style of a wood carving with studio lighting from this direction, taken with this camera at this focal length. And it gave me something that I could not create without way more time than the budget allowed for. And it's, I'm not saying it's generic, but it's very much not a style that's from somebody else. You know, I could have gone to an antique store and found these pieces and hoped that they were all the same material. So to me, it's just another tool to find resources to create better things from.
Let me take a moment to welcome Kristen Richter. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, who works with an AI company and will be able to contribute her knowledge from, you know, that base. Ken, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah. For me, I think a lot of this discussion is going to hinge on the word intelligence, as in artificial intelligence, and what we mean by it. And okay, when the word first was developed ages ago by a guy named Binet, the idea was that you had to have some kind of way of testing to see if people were capable of. And it was the capability that was the deciding factor. In that particular instance, it was going to kindergarten in France, actually, was how it first started. So they give these kids little tasks. Can you pile blocks? Can you do this? Can you tell them what this word means? Things like that. And if the kid was up to the standard, he would be allowed into the kindergarten. That's really where the whole thing started. We now use the word intelligence as having all this power to it. And one of the things we're realizing over and over now is that it's what we set as the criterion that determines what intelligence is. Like if we want it to be how well you do in a traditional academic system, then we use the more common IQ tests. They work beautifully. You know, you get 130 score on a Wechsler, and yeah, you're going to graduate from high school unless something untoward happens, and you're going to go to college and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't tell you anything about whether you'll be a good athlete. Okay, so it all comes down to what is our criteria. My problem with AI is that AI is now turning out to be the criteria. We're asking people, do you measure up? We're asking, do people measure up to what the AI can generate? Rather than what is the criteria we want to impose on this tool. So now, as you were saying very articulately, John, artificial intelligence is a tool. It is a tool that some people will be able to use better than other people. But it is still only a tool. It is a method. If we let it become the standard, oh, can you perform as well as AI? Is your writing the same as the AI says the writing of Charles Dickens is? Then we're doing something very backward. Okay. Then we're saying the artificial is what gives meaning. So I see it as a tool, one we should use, one we should learn to use, but not as a criterion. Now shut up at that.
Your comment, Ken, that kind of reminds me of a fish is brilliant in water, but don't ask it to climb a tree, right? And I do want to point out something about coming up to the standard of AI. Can you do as good as AI? If someone has, a tremendous background in art, they've gone to college, they've got 20 years in the field, they've produced art. Their concept of how to produce art is so much more sophisticated than most people's. So, for example, somebody's going to use an AI tool, and my take on it is they're basically doing a canvas with different brushes and different colors. And no, I didn't like that one. Let's do this again. No, I didn't like that one. Do it again. But the prompts they're giving, like John was saying, lighting from this side with this kind of woodcut carving. Don't ask me to do that, because I say, give me a pretty human face. Good, I'm done. Now, the question for me is, if someone like John uses Midjourney or whatever AI to create something, and I have another person and say to them, this is what I need, same specifications on my side. If I can tell that John's is recognizably better than this other person's, I may not be able to afford John if he does everything by hand. That may be prohibitively expensive to me, but I can afford and will afford him using a tool, as you're saying. This is just a new paintbrush. This is just a new paint palette. And I think that's where AI is going to go, not for the masses, because a lot of it's, remember when Chat GPT came out, it was a big toy, right? Everybody is having conversations with their kids through Chat GPT. But I think in the long run, AI is here to stay. And if we make it a tool, we can use it wisely. I am kind of curious, Todd, because you're a lawyer, recognized as a lawyer, IP attorney. So the concepts of copyright, of infringement, of who wrote this, and did I, plagiarism, how does that play with U.S. law? I know we have some folks from Europe on the call, but I'm very curious.
Sure. So copyright in the U.S. requires substantial copying, and oftentimes that means comparing works. But copying styles is never copyright infringement. I can recall 50 years ago the Beatles coming out and different bands seeing their success, copying their styles. I can recall when Stephen King was first popular, other authors coming out and trying to copy his style. So that's certainly something that predates AI. It's easier to copy styles now, but it's not like AI invented copying styles. And the key becomes, does the AI, using the AI in the other direction, is the copying so significant, the copying of style so significant that AI copies passages or something like that. I know in my practice, AI has been used in legal works, writing briefs and things like that. And sometimes AI will just invent cases that it'll cite to, which gets attorneys in trouble if they're not reviewing the AI's work to make sure that it's nonfiction. So in the same way, I could see, if you rely on AI too much, it copies from another author's work, and suddenly you are infringing in some way. But yeah, copying styles is not an issue.
If AI copies somebody else's work, who's responsible? me, the author, because I told AI to do something, or is the AI company responsible because they should have recognized, no, you can't copy Stephen King's 7 pages.
It's the publisher. It's whoever's selling it.
Really?
You're going to end up going after their money, and so whoever's selling it, and then through contracts, the publisher or whoever will come after the author. Might depending on the contract, might come after the AI company, but it is really just about the who's selling the work.
Okay. So Liz, be very careful when you're writing somebody's style that you're not actually just copying passages.
I'll never do that.
Other comments? What does anybody else think about this? Sabine, how does AI play in the theater arts, if at all?
I'm just trying to find my microphone again. Okay. Not at all. As far as I know, not at all. Anyway, I haven't made the experience, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I know that whenever we upload on YouTube, most of us have a YouTube channel to host all our demo reels, voice reels, demo reels, and so on, or extracts from stage work, on stage work in theater, and that is scrutinized. So you are being notified if there's anything within your video or your voice tape that is copyright protected, or I don't know, that is, you can't publish it. It's being taken away even from YouTube. I have to say, I find this all, I don't really know where what we call AI starts and where it ends. That's already very difficult. For example, I find it very difficult or very scary. Is that AI, all these algorithms in the social networks, it is something that we as actors need dearly. It has become a very important tool, like your Instagram or your Facebook, your TikTok, or one of those, and it happened to me that someone was, that I get notifications from Instagram, for example. It says, we have the suspicion that you are not actually you. So, things like this. And if you don't comply with our rules and regulations, we'll have to ban the account or block the account for a month or so. That would do really harm to my representation. But on the other hand side, I'm not popular enough, well-known enough, or I do not fill I can't fill all the criteria to have my account verified, what they call meta verified or something. So I find the whole thing very, but I'm not even sure if that is AI, what I'm talking about now, but I find it a great tool, but I have to say obviously in voice work, to get back to the point, to get back to your question, is it used not in the performance on stage, maybe with some projections, with music, I can imagine, yeah. But very, very certainly it is used for the recording studio. There's a lot of work, a lot of jobs that actors used to do that is now done with AI. I mean, I just need to say the word navigation, answering machines. A lot of voice work has been taken over by AI.
Fascinating. Mark, you had something to share?
Actually, yeah, I have a question for Todd. I'm not an attorney. I occasionally play one on Zoom, but I can get away with it because I'm not me, based on what Sabine was just saying. I'm under the impression, Todd, that AI is, albeit very sophisticated, an aggregation tool. So I was taken by your notion that sometimes in preparing briefs or whatever, I believe what you said was that AI invents things. And I would just like to understand what you mean by that a little better, because again, based on my own understanding, however limited, AI is not inventing anything. It's aggregating things that already are. And I will just share this. Someone recently took something that I had written on Substack and used Notebook LM, which I understand is a product of Google, to produce what the application called a deep dive. And it appeared to be a conversation between a man and a woman about what I had written. Subsequent to that, someone I know had written something that I saw on LinkedIn, and I took that and put it into Notebook LM, and it produced a 37-minute diatribe. And I shared it with the woman who had written the post that I put in there. And she pointed out that not only did it interpret what she had written in ways that she hadn't seen, which she appreciated, but it also attributed to her thinking that she hadn't even suggested or intended. And I think that's simply because the tool was aggregating everything that it could find. However, its algorithms perceived connections or relationships to whatever she had written. So sorry for the long-windedness, but my question again was, what did you mean, Todd, by occasionally AI creates things, invents things? Sorry, that's what you said.
Sure. So in this particular instance, I mean, a lawyer got in trouble, got disciplined because he submitted a brief that he'd used AI to generate, and the AI provided factual analysis to prove the point that he wanted to prove, and it cited to a case that that did not exist. So, was the case something where it, like you said, it aggregated, maybe it combined information from a couple of cases to insert that case and recognize from, what it aggregated that after you make this particular point, it's important to cite to a case. I can't really say, but I paid attention to the discipline and noted that if I'm using AI to help me write a brief or edit a brief, and it adds a case that I hadn't cited to, I'm going to make sure I read it before I submit.
Yeah, thank you. I hadn't even, I should have, I hadn't even connected my own dots to the idea that it might, here we go, aggregate precedent or case law from different and arguably unrelated cases, which my supposition tells me supports what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, and some inventing oftentimes is just pulling from a number of different sources to
yeah, agreed.
Together that fits together in a different way.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I'm so grateful for your clarification.
Oh, sure.
So
can I add some color context to that? I know we had a couple of other hands raised.
Oh, go ahead, Kristen, go ahead.
Okay, so that, Todd, is such a keen observation, and I just want to give a little bit more detail, Mark, on why that happens. So when you're thinking about artificial intelligence, the best way to think about this, just for comprehension's sake, is to think of it as a data model. So you have this data model, and you have a lot of inputs feeding into that model. The model's success is dependent upon the inputs, the accuracy of the data feeding the model, and the way that the model is trained. Every so often, especially with a GPT type artificial intelligence, what will happen is the model will hallucinate. So let's say, for example, you were on ChatGPT and you said, give me the step-by-step instructions to create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the model's inputs had never seen that before. The model may hallucinate and say to you, you're going to need pasta sauce, you're going to need noodles, you're going to need olive oil, and it starts to hallucinate and tell you something that's completely wrong. That is a part of the model's training. So in lieu of having a response, it will create one. Another example of this is I have a client who was leveraging ChatGPT to create some marketing materials. And I asked her to focus on citing sources because it needed to be accurate information. So she sends me the draft of the marketing article that she had written with the sources cited. And we looked up each source, and the source did not exist. It's because the model had hallucinated and made up sources based upon its inputs.
Wow.
I think it would
Thank you
be,
for that too, Chris.
I think it would be valuable for the people tuning in and listening. Could you share briefly what your background is? Because I know you work for an AI company, is that correct?
Yes, it's kind of inception. So I am a marketing strategist in the tech industry, specifically, and in the past 5 years, I've shifted into more of the cutting edge, more of the AI space. So right now, I'm building a marketing strategy for a company that is the operational layer for AI companies. These are typically high stakes AI models. So an example would be like government and defense, using that for government intelligence and predictions on when attacks may happen, or terrorism, data around terrorism, things like that. That could be quantitative hedge funds whose models make decisions about trades that affect world markets. So when you have AI models that are that high stakes, they must operate and perform at peak performance at all times. So the company that I work with now is responsible for making sure that those high stakes AI models are always up and are not making, false predictions or any sort of hallucinations, and the model isn't missing from a performance perspective.
Thank you. I found it fascinating that you use the term hallucinate.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a very kind way of saying you lied, you son of a bitch.
It happens a lot.
Every discipline, especially in engineering, modern engineering disciplines, they will use language which kind of separates the act from the interpretation. I'm not condemning it. I just find it amusing. It's going to be something that will show up in a story someday, let me tell you. Thank you for that. Rick, you've been very patient.
Oh, thank you. Not to have this go into a lawyer discussion, but I am a lawyer.
Fight.
I do know of that Texas case where the lawyer was disciplined because he had a brief created by AI, and it cited cases saying these cases support my position, and those cases did not exist. And so a hallucination is making up. But I will tell you, as a partner in a law firm, if anybody wrote a brief and cited cases that they themselves did not read to make sure they stood for what you're saying they want, you wouldn't have a job. But going to the more broader topic of AI, maybe I'm just dense, but I don't understand AI in terms of writing fiction. It doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe AI is a tool, but you can't just be a writer and have AI do your writing for you. That's not writing at all. In fact, every market that I know, every magazine has these disclaimers say, if you dare give us anything that's written by AI, we will blackball you. Never submit to us again. The mention about maybe using AI as a tool to get inspiration or whatever, isn't that the same as a regular author being inspired by other people? I mean, I guess all I could say is some famous poet said, bad poets imitate, good poets steal. So sure, writers are always influenced by other writers, whether it's Shakespeare, Homer, Charles Dickens, whoever. But if you want to use someone else's style and not your own, then you're not being anything. To go back to being a lawyer, a famous lawyer once said, when you're being a trial lawyer in front of a jury, you can't try. That's it.
and I don't mean because of the food from yesterday. Just as a point of clarification, Rick, it's not the AI writing fiction or something, it's hallucinating. It's hallucinating fiction. Just remember that. You can use the right language.
No. I disagree. I disagree.
Yeah, well,
Disagree.
it also can.
There's
I
different
think Rick
things.
is right on that one. So the hallucinations, just a point of clarification, hallucination might be when it creates something that is incorrect. So like the example of the spaghetti instructions instead of peanut butter and jelly. These models are also trained, some of them, to write. So there's a tool that one of my clients was assessing. It's called Junia AI. And that model specifically studied lots of different authors to be able to create features and functionality that allow you to write in a lot of different ways. Even if, let's say, Donna is writing, for example, I could submit basically a patch of Donna's writing, a sample, and then create a model that writes like Donna. And so in those cases, there are certain tools that are creating, and that's based on the training of the data model itself, what those capabilities may be.
Thank you. Ken, you had something to share.
Yeah, I do. Unfortunately, I have a whole list, but I'm going to try. One of the first things I want to go to that word hallucinate versus lying, because I think we're getting at something really very important here. If I tell you something that is not true, and I know it is not true, I'm lying. But if I'm talking to that purple creature standing next to me, and I see that purple creature, and I hear that purple creature's voice, I'm not lying when I tell you about the purple creature. I'm hallucinating. One of the things that we have to worry about, just as when we raise a child, and our 3-year-old child, has an imaginary friend. Okay? They have that imaginary friend. And we have to remember that. And we have to deal with the imaginary friend and teach the child the difference. And for the lawyers who are in the group, one of the things is when you have a child taking the stand, the first question the judge wants to know is, do you know the difference between the truth and a lie? And what is it? And if I say this, is that true or lie? Those kind of things. So one of the things that perhaps needs to be codified into our laws is that to be used commercially, an AI system must have knowledge of truth versus lie and must be self-correcting. Okay, which is, in other words, we use artificial intelligence to keep tabs on artificial intelligence, which I think is something we really do need to think a lot about. And
excuse me, Ken, isn't that called Congress? I think that's called Congress, what you just described.
Congress?
Yeah, people deciding what each other's truth is. Sorry, folks, that didn't go far.
Congress of baboons? So, okay, and that brings up another question, and I have a whole bunch, but the other question I wanted to pursue is, if we're going to teach AI to really supervise AI, then when we teach AI in the colleges and the high schools, but mostly I'm sure it'll be at the college and graduate school level, how do we make sure that the people who are understanding, studying, and monitoring AI are themselves independent of AI? And I want to tell you a quick story out of my life, because AI goes back, way back. When I was training to be in grad school, one of the big things that happened in psychology was something called the MMPI. You've probably taken it. Everybody on earth has taken it by now. It's a huge 500 plus over 500 question true false thing. And it's all done statistically to to identify what your pathology is. And years ago, I was doing my internship in a hospital, and I'm asked to interview this woman who's in the emergency room, who has taken an overdose of aspirin, and she won't talk to anyone. So I did what any good psychologist would do. I said, well, will you take this test? True, false, just mark true, false. So she did. And I looked at it, and, it gives you a diagnosis and all kinds of wonderful things. And what I did personally was I went to her doctor and said, at those times we were still killing rabbits, go kill a rabbit. This woman's pregnant and she was trying to induce an abortion. Now, nowhere on the MMPI is that a diagnosis. Okay, but the thing is, I could see beyond the artificial intelligence. That's my point. If people cannot see beyond the artificial intelligence, then they are only using it the way my mechanic uses that computer to find out what's wrong with my car. If they can see beyond it, then they should be in charge of it and create it. It's when we really have that creativity. So can AI write a novel? Yes. Is it a novel I want to read? Probably not. Can I tell the difference? Well, I guess that's going to be in how I look at the novel. But hopefully along the way, those of us who are the artists and are the creators are going to figure out how we can be above the AI. And when we no longer can do that, when we can no longer judge the AI and say, hey, we can see this more, we can see more, then perhaps it's time for the robots to take over. And maybe that day's coming.
Excellent points, Ken. Sabine, please.
I had actually something else, but Ken triggered something. One of the things I wanted, because of children, I wanted to mention, if you are interested in that, let me know in our Facebook group. I know that my youngest son is an IT specialist, and I know through him that the University of Luxembourg are running a research program and an experiment. I don't know if that is the correct term, but they have created a robot, a little robot, like a puppet, like a doll, that is interacting, that trains autistic children to interact better with their environment. So I was just thinking, oh my God, I mean, they are accompanied by a person, and they train with that little robot. And I found this in the beginning, I found this crazy. But I have seen a video of this when that was open doors or something, an event, and they filmed that with the consent of the people involved and everything, and it is mind blowing, and the success is huge. The success they have with the little robot is immense with the autistic children, and I find this okay, but it's scaring me. As I said, I keep using the word scary, but on the other hand side, it is a fantastic tool that really helps these kids on. So that's the one thing that I wanted to say. And then now, Kristin, please correct me if I'm wrong. Todd, Kristin. Also, because of what Ken said, as far as I understand, artificial intelligence only is because, as was said before, we are feeding it with, and now comes the important point, with what is known to this day. What a human brain, what a human lifetime can know. But I do believe that we are with transcendence. At the transcendence point, I think as artists, especially because that's what we say, AI in the arts, as artists, I think we have to transcend exactly that. the known. There's a and this is why, on the other hand side, it scares me on the one hand side, but on the other hand side, I think, okay, fine, yeah, it's cool because I can know something that I could have known but I didn't know. but the new, the other, the inspiration I cannot get from AI. So and that is reassuring me in a way. Okay, that was a lot, yeah. And I have another point, but maybe later.
Very good, Sabine. Thank you. Mark, you have something to share.
Yes, I do. Thank you. And interestingly enough, I was taken by your phrase, Sabine, about feeding it. But I wanted to particularly respond to what Ken was saying because I have a friend, you can agree with him or not, excuse me, who contends we live in what he calls a post-truth age. And I think that's borne out by, all of the things we hear and read about misinformation and disinformation. And my question to whoever is putting out stuff on those topics is who gets to decide that? So, and I think also related to what Kristen was saying is if we accept the idea that AI is a system or an application or something, and that it is the product of its programming, which I'm fascinated to realize we're now calling that learning, it's going to aggregate and regurgitate what has been fed into it. And honest to God, I absolutely love your idea, Ken, but I have no idea how or by whom that's ever going to be arbitrated. End of sermon.
John, please.
I think Amy was before me. She wants to go.
Amy, you're up.
All right. Well, I put in the chat, I put multiple subjective experiences to create an objective fact. Seem like an hallucination. Regardless of what your artwork is, whether it's music or dance or books or art, or if it's your profession, if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you're an electrician, if whatever you might be, everybody looking at you and everybody experiencing what you have created is going to see something a little bit differently. And for any of us to assume that AI could know what I created and how I created it and when I created it and what my motivation was would be a hallucination. And I have a great example because a lot of these, there's a lot of AI doctors that you can get stuff from online, which I find completely scary. I mean, I don't know. I guess if I had a headache and I consulted an AI doctor, okay, cool. Like, but so the example that I have that pertains to myself, so I'm not speaking for anybody else, is I've been experiencing some health problems for a couple of years, and it's doing all kinds of very strange things to my body, and nobody can find the origin of it. And it's come out in different ways. Like I have pain, I have like some other problems I have had. Like so, and it's not always the same. It sort of fluctuates. And when I was describing this to Joseph last year, I was giving him a very logical and reasonable interpretation of what the doctors had said, and he didn't care one bit what the doctors had said. He said, "But why do you still have this?" And knowing Joseph's background and perspectives have some similarities to mine, I said, "Oh, I still have this because I'm still angry." And how on earth would AI come up with something like that when if you asked 10 different doctors what was wrong with me, they would give you 10 different scenarios, 10 different medications, 10 different therapies, 10 different this and 10 different that. And Joseph cared nothing about all of that. He cared about my one sentence, because I was still angry. And So, and in actuality, my opinion aligned with Joseph's more than anybody else's. So, so when you create that piece of work or that piece of music or you're on stage performing, it would be absolutely impossible for anybody to know the origin of your inspiration. That's all.
Thank you very much, Amy, for that shout out. I do appreciate it. I'm available for house calls. And anyway, John, you were actually ahead of Ken, and I have a comment I'd like to add. So please, John, would you share?
Yeah, my question was for Kristen. It was, I'm looking for more of a peek behind the curtain as to, since you have insight to where AI is scraping the data from for certain things, in regards to the lawyers having these made up cases cited. They're called hallucinations, but then as a person looking at it on the other end of it, the AI is confidently incorrect. Is there a way to highlight something that you question, or you really want to make sure that it's getting correct, and seeing where it's citing that from? Or do you see that on the back end someplace where it's like you get this feedback from users that say, hey, by the way, this was completely wrong. Where did it even figure this out from?
So I'm sure that's a great question, by the way, John. I think it kind of varies, and I'll level set. Like, I have very limited insight into this because being on the marketing side of the house, like, I have to have a technical aptitude and I ask questions, but I'm not on the tech side of the house. But a couple of things that I know. One is, as end users, when we are interacting with these applications, we should challenge the results. We should question the results. I would say every single time you're prompting ChatGPT for information, you should be doing your own due diligence on the side to understand, do I feel this is accurate information? Can I validate this information? So the first thing, like, you are the first line of defense. Anything that you see or consume that doesn't feel quite right, follow your gut on that. And I'd say the point that was made earlier about, I think that was Mark, about the reliability of the information is always questioned, right? Because depending on the application you're interacting with, it's scraping its source from a lot of different places. And now would be a good time to share, like, none of these, when we're thinking about the accuracy of the information, which is what you're asking about, and I think I've heard a lot of questions about what is the impact of this long term. Right now, it's incredibly localized. This is still, even though it's been around for thousands, the concept of artificial intelligence has been around for 1,000 years, thousands of years perhaps. We're still in the beginning stages of this because there are no AI models that are reliable. Reliability is an AI's actual nemesis. And so a lot of people are doing now is trying to create reliability in their AI models, and they're just not reliable. I'll give you an example of that. So does anyone remember Google Flu? Okay. Google Flu was one of the first AI models, but people didn't even really know what that was at the time. Google started competing with the CDC to race to see essentially who could predict flu outbreaks in the United States first. And Google Flu applied an artificial intelligence to this process. And the way that and it worked for years. Google Flu was beating the CDC to predict what flu strains were going to hit and where they were hitting geographically in the United States. And then all of a sudden, these models started breaking down and the information wasn't correct. And the CDC came back up for air and started beating Google. It was a nightmare for Google from a marketing perspective. It was an actual PR crisis. So why did the model break? The model broke for the same reason that models break today, is that it was not reliable. So when we talk about the model's outputs only being as good as its inputs, the inputs for the Google Flu model in this example was, one of them was IP addresses, geographical location, the demographics of that they could scrape from, the end user on the other end of the computer. But primarily it was Google search terms when people were searching symptoms related to the flu. So what happened, well, there was a cultural shift And the cultural shift meant that the data also shifted. The data became unreliable. So people started Googling differently when they were becoming sick with the flu, and the entire model broke. We still see that happening today. There are no AI models that are reliable. So when we're thinking about, John, going back to your question, the outputs of these models, it comes out sounding really, really confident, but it is only as good as its inputs. And oftentimes we as end users have no visibility into the inputs that are feeding these models and the ways in which they're trained. So we should question all of it, really.
Ken, I'm gonna jump in ahead of you. It sounds a lot like we're getting into the realm of plausible deniability with some of these AI models. And anybody wants to tell me to not talk about this, that's fine. I will be quiet, and I'll ask Todd to keep a watch on me as I start this. A long time ago, I created a system which was, everyone said it's artificial intelligence. I said, no, it's an altricial intelligence, because it was literally a learning system. It learned as a child learned. It was designed on the human brain. And as it experienced more and more interactions with people from everywhere in the globe, it learned more. It experienced more, literally experienced. One of the drawbacks to it, and I said this right up front when people were using it, if the majority of people who are using this system tell it that Florida is west of California, it's going to go, oh, okay, California, yeah, Florida is west of California. And it's going to take a lot of work from people for the system to begin saying, oh, Florida is south, that's down the south. And much like someone who's been in a bad relationship, if you spontaneously put into its system, where is Florida, even after it's been retrained, it's going to go, it's south, because it remembers. It will remember. One of the things we built into it was a long-term memory system. So it would not forget. It would merely say, oh, this is new information, but how confident am I? That's what I'm hearing here is, we cannot as yet say to the system that's generating this information for us, did you lie to me? Did you fabricate this? That's going to be one of the turning points. The system that I designed and Todd was elemental in bringing forward, that was actually based on understanding human emotions and language. So it did actually understand anger. It did actually understand male versus female responses to things. And I apologize, Ken, but this is a question I really want to drop in. We have a diversity of backgrounds here. We have authors, we have actors, we have artists. Can you tell when something has been AI generated in your field? Okay. John is nodding. Clarabelle is nodding. She's an award-winning poet and editor and publisher. And Sabine is nodding. I will briefly share my experience, if I may. Mark actually offered something in another group meeting, and he said, this is AI generated. And I said, I would not be able to tell that it was AI generated. My take on it would be that was written by a really idiotic high school sophomore, and I would flunk them because it was so poorly written. I mean, it was just, if you got to be a sophomore in high school and that's the level of your writing, we got a real issue here. Wow, look, this goes back to something else I said. Oh, you used a verb. Good for you. So I would like to know from the others, from the attorneys. Rick, I know, is also an author and an attorney. Todd, I know, has had to suffer by reading some of my work, and he's an attorney. Sabine, Sarah, John, can you say, yes, I know that's AI generated when you recognize it? And this actually goes back into something I'll offer for Ken. I don't know if you remember when the big quote unquote psychological tools were Kismet And basically Kismet echoed back. It was an AI, not an AI system, it was an online system for therapeutic uses. And it basically echoed back to the user, whatever they typed in. I'm having a bad day. Tell me about your bad day. Okay. Well, I'm having issues with my neighbors. Tell me about your neighbors. Not the most sophisticated system, but it was amazing how many people used it. So my people have their hands up. Okay, so I'll be quiet. Ken, please.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of go back to something else that kind of was in there, which is how do we know what's true? I mean, that's really the underscoring. I mean, it's also the underscoring of your question too. How do we know what is true versus what is false? And amazingly, people think, they go to university and they major in things and people in their family say, well, how are you ever going to get a job doing something with that? And one of the ones that's always questioned, I'm doing my bachelor's degree in philosophy. Philosophy? How are you ever going to get a career as a philosopher? It's one of the most in-demand fields in the world. Why? Because we have to constantly be asking ourselves, what is true and what is not? And we used to have a system, to go back to what you were saying earlier about, being inundated basically with these scenarios. We used to have a system, it was called the press. And because people in the press were trained in a certain way, they would all be able to fact check. In sciences, we called it peer review. I mean, I'd do a research article, I'd send it off to the journal, and the journal would say to me, well, did you consider this? Did you? And eventually it would get published, hopefully, but it was reviewed by other people. Could I lie? Yes. Could I make up a control group? Yes, I could. I didn't, but I could. Of course, if I were caught, I'd be blackballed. Again, that whole idea of blackball. But truth, we've always had this idea of what is truth. Now we live in a society where truth is that purple imaginary friend, where truth is something we are making up as we go along. And I think that the scary thing for me, and I want to go back to this, in AI, is that AI will become the standard of truth. So it no longer will matter if you've got that particular article or case happened or not, because AI is saying it happened. So now the judge is going to have to accept it. And that's where we're moving. We're moving away from an external reality. So how do we validate things? And, we can do a whole other roundtable about how we validate things in life, but that's more philosophy of science than anything else. And the answer, though, quite simply is, and this is where the other thing comes in, you can never validate anything if it isn't reliable. If something is not reliable, it can't be valid. That's the limit on validity. Truth can only work if you get the same results. And we are living in an age where maybe there isn't any truth. Maybe everything is relative. And maybe, just maybe, there's no reality at all. So let's just consider that as an alternative and hope that whatever robot or computer that created me won't do another one, because, hey, I'm such a spoil sport.
So anybody wants to comment on the fact that Ken believes we're all living in the Matrix and he's waiting for a reboot, feel free to jump in. Amy, go for it.
Maybe if we could all understand that we all have amnesia at some point in time or another, I mean, I'm sure that we all thought as little kids that Columbus discovered America on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, because we had to repeat that how many times and do little book reports and read books and sit with the Indians, sit Indian style around Thanksgiving and you know have little hats and stuff like that. But we all know that's not true, you know. And I'm sorry to disturb you, Joseph. You know, but we were taught to have amnesia. We were taught to not pay attention to all the other things that are true. You know, like how Cortez marched in and took over Montezuma because he somehow thought that Cortez was a god. That has been taught over and over and over again, but it's just not true. But we're asked to have amnesia and we're asked to forget everything that happened before that period of time and asked to keep ourselves in our culture and out of their culture to understand the context in which these things were written and why they were written. And as far as Joseph's product that he was creating, I had the same thing in my own life that I had to overcome. I had to reteach myself the truth, sort of as a form of amnesia. So, 16 years ago, I had traumatic brain injury, and it was one of the strangest things to me is like if somebody gave me a multiple choice test and I knew intrinsically, I knew the answer was A, but out loud, I would speak the answer B. And part of me thought the answer B was absolutely the right answer. But there was this little part inside of me going, hey, that's not the right answer. But I couldn't figure out what the right answer was. And I certainly didn't want to tell people like, hey, I think I just gave you the wrong answer. And I have absolutely no idea what the right answer is. But fortunately, I have a little bit of a goofy personality and I laughed my way through it and I allowed people to correct me. And I was like, yeah, I was just testing you to see if you knew. But that's what we're asking. That's what you're kind of asking computers and people to do what I have to, to kind of laugh and go, oh, ha ha ha, I was just testing you. I gave you the wrong answer on purpose. Like that's not something that most people's egos or most computer systems would be able to comprehend. Anyway, that was my thought.
I appreciate that thought, and being able to recognize an entity's own lie, so to speak, or hallucination, however you want to phrase it, requires a level of sophistication and intelligence which to date is reserved to the higher primates. We are able to lie and know we have, and chimps are able to lie and know they have. But I've never seen any research, it's maybe out there, I just haven't seen it, which indicates, no, let me correct that. Parrots know when they've lied. So there we go. Animal intelligence. Amen. More power to us. Liz, you had something, please.
Yes. It was about a year or so ago. I and a couple of other authors I know were asked to do some work for a game, and an AI had basically written some descriptions of characters, different species on 3 different planets, and they asked us to actually go through them and actually individualize them and make them more interesting and more entertaining. And it was interesting because I think what you were saying, how can you tell if AI is written it? I think if you took one of them on its own, possibly you might not have realized that. But when you were reading like 30 descriptions, one after the other, you realize just how sort of bland and how close they were to each other, and just how they'd obviously just worked on the same parameters and they hadn't used any imagination. So I and these other couple of authors rewrote the descriptions, and apparently Graham's developer said to our friend who'd been organized, said that he couldn't believe how much better they were once real authors, real people had actually written the descriptions and put some imagination and some individuality into it.
Thank you. I think that speaks to something Amy put in the chat, which was AI removes her personality from her writing. And I think, again, I want to go back to the question I posed earlier. Can we in our separate disciplines recognize when something is AI generated as opposed to human generated? And, you know, just to put a piece into there, Joe Jackson Stepping Out, the drum beat in there was purely synthetic. And people were complaining because it was so perfect. It was too perfect. Now, what's amusing is 30, 40 years later, Joe Jackson is giving a concert and he wants to get that original sound again. The machines were gone. Nobody was using those machines anymore. He had to get someone to program a system to do that accurate drum beat, because now the musical systems are work code in errors to make it more human. Mark, please.
Thank you. I'm just going to throw a couple of things in here. First, there was a gentleman named Phil. That's all I know, and it's spelled F-I-L. He's a young British man who has a website, a YouTube channel called Wings of Pegasus, and he has done. Actually, he's outed some well-known bands that were lip syncing, and he did it by comparing frequency comparisons from different allegedly live performances, which were perfectly the same, which is just completely impossible. I also wanted to respond to the question about whether I can tell if someone's work has been AI generated. And in some instances, I can, when suddenly the style of someone's writing changes and at least arguably improves. And I've noticed that in a couple of instances. And then I wish Ken were still here, because he said at one point we always had an idea of what's true. And I wanted to challenge that with one particular example. Some of us may remember, some of us may not, that from 1962 to 1981, Walter Cronkite was the celebrity, I suppose, on the CBS Evening News. And he ended every broadcast with, "That's the way it is." And then he would say the date. And I can remember being a kid and reading newspaper articles about the fact that the United States had been sending what were described as advisors to Vietnam, and these advisors were getting killed. Even then I knew what was going on. Meanwhile, Walter Cronkite is telling us, no, that we're not sending military people over there. And so I don't know. I wonder if somehow we've become less naive and less gullible, or on the other side of the coin, more willing to question everything that is being served up to us, regardless of medium. And again, I wish Ken were here to respond to that.
Clara, please.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. So I wanted to jump in and share something that I had already put in the chat. So when we're talking about if you can tell if something was made by AI or not, as an editor, to me, it is almost immediately apparent if something's written by AI. I can tell almost right away. I've done a lot of editing. I used to be a TA. I read a lot of papers and a lot of submissions in my time, and there's just a smell that you get almost immediately when something is AI generated. It's shiny. Like at first glance, it seems really well written and really well put together. There's big words, fancy vocabulary. It sounds really lofty, but the more you read, I find often there's just so little substance Like I'm reading words. Sometimes I've read AI generated essays that are 3,000, 5,000 words long. And at the end of them, I'm like, I didn't read anything. That was fluff. There was no argument. There was no substance at all. And they're usually very repetitive. That is a big giveaway that something was AI generated. You know, the same 5 big vocabulary words get used over and over and over. The same sentence structure gets used over and over. Sometimes I've even found essays where the same paragraphs are more or less repeated. And it's usually pretty apparent right away. Like, oh, this was spit out by a computer. A person didn't actually vet or compose any of this at all. It feels very stilted and very fake. And my other colleagues, I have a lot of colleagues who are still in academia who read lots of papers. They've said the same thing. And they've shown me essays where they're like, I know this was written by AI. I can't put my finger on it, but I know that this wasn't written by a human. So I think there is definitely a spidey sense that you get once you've read enough. I'd be curious to see what other people, if other people have had the same experience.
Thank you very much, Clara. Sabine.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Not, of course, not in terms of writing. I have no experience, but when it comes to voiceovers, for example, AI is more and more used, and I don't know, the first, give me 30 seconds, make it a minute, but I can smell it also. The soul is missing.
Soul.
I'd like to put it as simple as that. The soul is missing because every voiceover artist who does a documentary, even if it's a dry documentary on whatever, you have the one who's doing the voiceover has an attitude, wanting it or not. Even if you take most of it out, we never manage to take our attitude towards the subject fully out. And I don't know if it's that which makes the difference, but whatever it is, there's no soul, there's no life, and that's goes exactly with what was said before, but exactly what Clarabelle said. Flat, there's no depth. And even if it's the most ordinary thing that somebody is saying, you always say it with some inner disposition. Yeah, so, and I had almost another thing where AI is often used in filmmaking or in the visual photography, filmmaking, is, for example, to create storyboards, to create mood boards or storyboards. And I think that's, on the other hand side, I find this very helpful. If you want, I can someone has made an image there of me and with AI in a particular environment, which we could not have seen or entered before. But it was used to create this mood board, and based on which the color grading happens in a film after that. And so in this context, I find it, you see it immediately too, but I find it very interesting and very helpful, as on many other occasions where AI can be extremely helpful, I think.
Sabine and Clara, I find it fascinating that you both use the term smell, which is a deeper sensory system, and it's one which human beings in modern society pay very little attention to. We know when something stinks, literally, or when something smells really good, but olfactory systems are one of our most primitive sensory systems, and they're the ones in language we go to when something is, something's rotten and dead, Mark, as they say. So I thought that was fascinating. And you mentioned soul, and I noticed that Mark agreed.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that goes into the authenticity discussion.
If I could add a quick thing, Joseph, your mention of smell reminded me. I know, sorry, Rick, I know you're waiting to talk, so I'll be quick. I assume a lot of us here are probably familiar with the uncanny valley, that concept of the uncanny valley with robots and AI, right? That's the same thing I think that we're picking up on when we're reading AI generated essays. It's just not human. There's something about it that is hard to put into words, but you feel primally like I am not interacting with a human here. And it makes it like, for me, it leaves me feeling uncomfortable after I've read something that was AI generated. And I assume other people are probably picking up on that same really deeply primal sense of something is not right here. There's something wrong.
I'm going to ask you, after we get a chance for Rick and Sarah to chat, I'm going to ask you to come back to the uncanny valley because it's got a great ski slope. The toe system is not that good, but Rick, please.
Thank you. When it comes to AI, excuse me, excuse me, I'm about a 1 on a scale of 100 for AI in terms of understanding it. All I can tell you from my perspective at a 1 level is it seems to be a very good tool that can be used for lots of things, but I can see right now it's not very intelligent. Going back to the that law example, it's totally unintelligent to cite a case saying, Judge, you should follow the logic of this case when that case does not exist. Why? Because lawyers know we have an adversary on the other side who's going to be double checking us, as well as the judge who has his law clerks will be double checking us. So that's not intelligent to do something as stupid as that. So that's just, there's no intelligence in AI that I can see with that example. And my last comment would be, it's kind of like maybe a 5-year-old kid doesn't know when he can get away with a lie or not. He just doesn't know. So he lies, thinks he can get away, but he has no chance at all. If AI ever can go from being a 5-year-old to a 15-year-old, and get past the age of reason and know how to get away with lies, that could be a whole different problem for human race.
Let me offer that I think we'll be able to tell when AI develops a 15-year-old mindset and skill set because they'll be asking for the keys to the car. Sarah, please.
Yeah, I think in answer to your question about can I tell if art is generated by AI? Very much so. I think we can all do that, even if we're not artists. It's that polished, airbrushed art that you see that is usually part of people's marketing. And it looks really very, very perfect and just like everyone's talked about, very soulless and doesn't have any character to it. It's quite generic. So I think it's quite easy to spot. Having said that, there may well be some really very sophisticated users of AI that can, manipulate images to make it look like it's an artist that has created it, putting brush strokes in and so on and so forth. But the very obvious pictures that are generated by AI are definitely something you can tell. What you can't tell, has someone put into AI an idea for a painting? I don't know, do I? I don't know what they're going to do in order to generate their ideas. Are they using AI to replace their imagination and their inspiration? That to me is worrying, because the whole creative process is what we are as humans. We are creators, and particularly women, to be a creator, to be actively involved in the creative process is so important for our mental health and well-being and all that kind of stuff. So AI in itself, I use it. I do use it, not for my art. I use it for like my marketing. I've used it to write a blog when I've not had enough time. I see it as a bit like a virtual assistant, I guess. If I'm sort of struggling with the name of a course, I might put in some ideas and it will generate a few things for me. But I never use anything like as it's being given to me. I'll always sort of like sandwich it together and create something that works for me. But I don't use it for my art, because art is supposed to be humanly directed. I don't know if that's the right phrase. It's supposed to be directed from within, I think. And AI cannot replace your imagination, inspiration, and intuition. And that to me are the three things that are so important as a creative. You can work with it, but I don't think it'll ever replace it, or we ever have to feel we have to transcend it. I just don't think you know, I mean, when the Persians made their rugs and they were so perfect, they deliberately put flaws into their rugs to show that a human had created it, because they believe, they recognize that imperfection is part of the creative process. So there we go. That's all I wanted to share.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Mark, I want to come in for a second. John,
Yeah.
you also use AI. And as I said earlier, to me, when you describe how you use it, you're not using AI to create your art. You're using AI as a palette to give you ideas, to test theories. Much like I, as an author, I'll write a paragraph and go, no, that's not right. I'm going to do it again. You know, write the paragraph a second time. No, that's not right. I got to change this dialogue. That to me is when you and perhaps Sarah at some point say, okay, I've written a paragraph. That's not exactly the way I want it. So I'm going to do the paragraph again. And you ask the AI to make the color over here and do this over there. Could you share some of that aspect, perhaps in response to Sarah's comments? If you wish, you don't have to.
Yeah, no, totally. No, I agree with Sarah that there's AI that looks like it was generated. It's generated by a computer. It just has like that weird look to it. It just has an uncertainty in the lines, you know, doesn't look purposeful. And usually that's like, it looks like first attempt of what you asked it to do. You know, you didn't ask it to create a variation on it or give it more input or something like that, or you just asked it to create the literal thing that you wanted. So how I've used it is to create the assets. So I will do the general like ideas and say, have a couple standing here. This is the kind of like look that I want, cinematic or dramatic lighting or something like that. And then see what it gives me and say, all right, that's a good path. Now let's start refining that. Let's use this camera angle. Let's use this camera and focal length. Let's change the way we're lighting it. You know, it's going to be light it like a medieval period piece. So it's got more like dimmer orange candle lights or blue moonlight or something like that. You know, you can tell it to be use a certain film grain, and so it has like a certain look to it, and that's when you start giving it that soul. You know, it's something that could I go out and do? Yeah, it would take me weeks to do it because I need to get that camera or the actors, the lighting, the location scouting and stuff like that. Or I could find it in I could find it in stock photography and spend 40, 60 hours compositing it and stuff like that and getting it there. But again, I didn't take the pictures that I'm using from the stock photography, so it's not my art to an extent. But not until I bring it into Photoshop and start saying, all right, let's use the character I generated from this one, bring it in here, we'll change the color of the coat, bring this character in, we'll move the hand a little bit in Photoshop. I like this background, let's try a different version of this. You start to paint with your words to literally create these pictures that you need, these assets, to now go and composite it together. So you can tell when somebody has put the time in and has the knowledge of like different movies, different books, different like art history. It plays a big role in it because you can tell it to mimic painting styles, not artists themselves, but like impressionistic painting or something like that, or modern. And then you can start making it look more and more refined. There's forums that are for art critiques for personal work, and for a while they were riddled with people just asking, what would you call this style? How would you say this is described? And you could tell people were just trying to ask a question to say, how can I get the prompts to put into AI to just copy this generically? They weren't trying to learn how that happens and why that looks the way it is. They were just saying, how can I copy this? And artists push back and crack down on that kind of thing because it's lazy. It's not learning.
Very good. Thank you, John. Mark, you did have your hand raised. Did you have something you want to add?
It was not at all important, and I realized we were running out of time, and I would much rather hear what Clarabelle has to say. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Clara, please.
All right, Uncanny Valley, back by popular demand. Amy, did you want to say anything? I know you had your hand up too.
No, I actually wanted to have more about that. So
Okay.
you
Okay.
started to answer my question, which is why they asked you to go. So
All right, cool. So I will preface this with I'm probably going to butcher all of the scientific hypotheses. So this is just my writerly understanding of the Uncanny Valley research. But so I've heard some researchers have hypothesized that the reason the Uncanny Valley exists is that it's related to really deep subconscious or even unconscious human instincts to protect themselves from veiled threats or hidden threats. And it relates, I think, to that spidey sense that I suspect some of us are getting from AI generated media. So some researchers think that that uncanny valley feeling or that discomfort that you get when interacting with robots or AI is kind of a disgust response of like, am I interacting with a predator? Am I interacting with a threat? Am I interacting with something that's trying to trick me so it can hurt me or eat me? Or is this a diseased human? Like they're human enough, but they're not acting completely human and they're making me uncomfortable and I need to get away from them because something is up here that might threaten me and my safety. So I know that's why we get really uncomfortable when we're interacting with robots that are so human, yet there's just something that's not right. They don't blink quite right. They don't sound quite right. And we're like, what are you? And I wonder, my pet theory personally is I think that that's why AI generated stuff just seems so odd to us. It's mimicking humanity, but not good enough to actually fool us, just enough to make us uncomfortable. Just enough to make us feel like there's some threat that we can't put our finger on. So that's personally why I think, like, I read something AI generated and I'm like, I don't like this. This makes me uncomfortable. I look at an AI generated image and I'm like, there is something off. This is not human. I might not be able to put it into words, but I can feel it. This is not human.
To add on to that, Clara, just because that feeling that you're getting, my hypothesis, the best that I can come up with is when we're thinking about the inputs that go in, there are all sorts of feeds that we can connect to models, historical data, objective fact, subjective fiction, so many different feeds. What we cannot feed a model is a human experience. What we cannot feed a model is the experience of having lived or memories or interactions with loved ones or strong emotions, not really, not deeply. So I think what's missing is literally that, the human experience. So you're interacting with a shell.
Sabine, please.
Clarabelle, Kristen, I couldn't agree more. You reminded me of something that I had totally forgotten. I once offered a casting a robot version. So I offered the character acting as a robot. And I remember there was a lot of competition, as often for these roles, and I knew it would probably not the way they want to go with the character. But I just couldn't help it. I had so much fun doing this. However, very, very, very uncomfortable. And it's exactly the words you used, uncomfortable. Something, yeah, it was meticulous work. I worked days and days on that role, so to say, for the casting process only. I offered another version, an alternative version. But maybe that's exactly why we smell something's not right. And I would like to say, to unlearn all the things that I had to unlearn from the first, I remember the first trials, the first couple of times filming, it was just impossible. And this, and this, and this. And I realized all the little things that make us humans act like a human that I had to unlearn for that casting. So yeah, very uncomfortable, and it was tiring. I was like done after I had this. I was, how can I say, it's undescribable. It's like when you recover after having had the worst of flu for a week. Terrible, terribly tiring to play this. So it just reminded me. Thank you for that. I'm not sure. I think I still have it. So if anyone's interested, I would be happy to share.
Thank you, Sabine. John, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, to Amy's question about what's going to happen with the generation who's comfortable with AI as truth. It's happened so many times in the past with people who manipulate photos, the Loch Ness monster being a log or something like that. Like people, the technology at the time is so advanced, it's almost like magic. I think I'm butchering a Arthur C. Clarke quote, but it's we're in that window where you can do these amazing things and there's no guardrails. And not everyone knows what it looks like when it is fake, the tells, that they just believe it to an extent until it becomes such a commonplace that you can kind of just, your bullshit meter goes off and you're like, all right, I can kind of know this is not real, or I should look into it more, or something like that.
Clara.
Yes. Do we have time for, I know we're coming up on time. I had a.
Well, we're past, but I'm okay. If people have to leave, they will, and I will cry and feel like I've been.
Sounds good. I just had a little addendum I wanted to add after Sabine. You reminded me actually of when you talked about how difficult it is to play the role of a robot or an AI. So I know some people who narrate audiobooks and they do voice acting as a kind of a side gig, and they have all said that it is so difficult to play the voice of a robot or an AI. They have to record and re-record and re-record because it's really difficult to get that flat affect that AI or robots have, and they'll keep doing recordings, and each time it's like, oh, I sound too human. There's too much variation. There's too much emotion, and I have to keep doing it. So anyway, that just reminded me. I wanted to throw that in there. I think that's a common experience.
Thank you very much, Clara. I'm going to call close in a moment. Before I do, Kristen, thank you very much for joining us. Very much appreciate your information, your input. I hope you'll join us again because you are creative. You do it with things that I am not creative with, that I don't think John or Sarah or Rick are creative with, but you are creative in your way. And that's what the roundtable is all about.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to offer that that system I mentioned earlier, which is probably still in use worldwide. We designed it to have a recognizable uncanny valley, and it recognized 5 or 6 levels of difference from the people it was interacting with, because it was interacting with humans. That's how it was learning. And we use it as a defense mechanism. And when one of the products we offered from it was a defense mechanism, that it had the ability to tell online when something was not a human interacting with it. And it would lock itself down so that, it could not get hacked. It could not get, in our language, as hallucination is your language, it could not get violated. So I want to offer that whatever we may think of AI now, it is a growing, evolving thing. Feel free to disagree with me, Kristen. It's a system that is not yet complete. AI technology currently is at best maybe 50 years old, functionally maybe 5 or 10 years old. And this goes back to what I said earlier. A fish is brilliant in water, but don't ask it to climb a tree. So will there be robots interacting with us? Asimov says so. It's a staple of science fiction and fantasy. Yeah, it's going to happen. You can't run the ISS without those kinds of systems. You cannot, as Kristen was saying, you cannot do intelligence models in the government, any government, without running those systems. I'm not saying they're 100% accurate. I'm just saying they're being used. I think it is up to us as artists and creators and as citizens, as people, as we're on the planet, to be aware that these things are being used, to pay attention, to lock our sense of smell, as Sabine and Clara were saying, to use, to recognize the uncanny valley, because the models are going to get better and better. The AI is going to get better and better. It's just a matter of, are we willing to pay attention or say, yeah, that's great, fine. That's it for here. Any last words, anybody, before we close for the day? And thank you all. This has been a great session, my opinion.
No, thank you.
Great topic.
Very good. Thank you all. Thanks everyone for watching and paying attention and listening. Do remember to come on back. We do this at the end of every month, the last Thursday of every month. Didn't do it today on a Thursday because Americans had Turkey Day of Infamy yesterday. That's a political statement, folks. However, please do come back and join us. We have links in the video. Hope to see you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching RoundTable 360, where creatives from diverse fields and across the globe gather to discuss what's relevant, irrelevant, serious, and fun. RoundTable 360 is brought to you by Biz Catalyst 360 and Northern Lights Publishing. Our shows are taped the last Thursday of every month at 7:30 a.m. Hawaiian time, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, 6:30 p.m. London time, 19 hours 30 minutes Central European Standard Time, and whatever time that converts to, wherever you are. Please join us at http://nlb.pub/roundtable. That address is on your screen. See you next time, and until then, stay well and safe.